Good morning, everyone. When I checked the weather forecast this morning, it said snow at 10 o'clock. There even seems to be some sun outside, so things are working in our favor. Thanks for assembling for this session on food security and water. One of the key, as you know, SDGs, it is ending hunger is the second SDG adopted by the High-Level General Assembly at the UN. It remains, in terms of fighting poverty, perhaps the most crucial objective. And in terms of beyond poverty, of course, not only economic, but social and political stability and progress. Without ending hunger and food insecurity, we will never succeed. I'm not a specialist of Syria, but there are some, and maybe some of our distinguished panel have some views on that, that one of the things that preceded the tragedy was a long period of drought in Syria and a danger of food insecurity. In many other parts of the world, this does remain a key problem. It is, in terms of hunger, primarily an African problem, but there are other parts of the world, particularly the South Asian subcontinent, where hunger remains a very serious challenge, and the zone of wars like Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, of course, which are also threatened in that way. And the issue is closely linked to many things. I don't think it's a one-dimensional issue, but of course water, climate protection is one very important issue that needs to be tackled with the food security issue. And finally, before turning it to our very distinguished panel, I would like to maybe underline an optimistic note that new technologies are becoming available that, if combined with good institutional setups and political will, can help a lot. Some of the new technologies, the satellite that can tell you where to deploy water resources in the most productive way, that can locate the poorest people and so on, are extremely powerful. And it's quite amazing what this technology may offer in terms of promise on the front against the fight, in the fight against hunger. So I will turn first. We have a panel which, of course, you all know already. We have Mostafa Terrab, who is the president of the OCP, and the OCP has always given this issue a big priority in terms of its research, in terms of its activity as a world citizen. We have Minister Arkebe Oqubay from Ethiopia, who advises the Prime Minister also on these issues, and who is one of the, I would say, economic leaders of Ethiopia. And we have Kostas Stamoulis, who's the director responsible for food security and nutrition at the FAO. So I hope this will be an interactive discussion where we will have time to turn to the audience also. And I turn now to Mostafa Terrab, the president of OCP.
Thank you, Kemal, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, OCP is a fertilizer company, so we stumbled, I would say, across the food security global challenge as a fertilizer company, trying to make sense of some of the figures that you all probably know but are worth repeating. What is the challenge? How can we measure the challenge for food security? In 2000, we talk about climate change and we talk about implications at the end of the century. But let's look at something much closer, 2050. In 2050, we will have the global population between 9 to 10, the latest estimate I've seen, 9.7, 9.6 billion people to feed. Half of them, by the way, half of the growth will come from Africa. So Africa will add from 1 to 1.5 billion 2050. That's only 30 years, 35 years from now. And then most estimates, because of limited arable land, population is growing, but arable land, usable arable land, as a net addition, very limited. That means that we are going to have to double food production without doubling available arable land. In fact, with almost a fixed amount of arable land. That would mean, it's a big challenge. That would mean probably more productive, more yields per fixed arable land. A big challenge only in 35 years, if we look at the figures. So, what are the global policies? You know, as you mentioned, Kemal, it's now part of the SDGs in a prominent position. But what are the global policies to address that? And this is where I would like to turn a bit to zoom on Africa. As I said, Africa will add 1.5 to 1.5 billion people by that horizon. And you yourself, Kemal, associated Africa with the problem. And indeed, on a global scale, if people associate food security issues in Africa, it's negatively. Well, if you look at the figures, you come very quickly to the conclusion that Africa is going to be a part of the solution, globally, not just part of the problem. Okay? And the figures is that the amount of arable land remaining globally is really basically in Africa. 60% is the estimate that remaining unused arable land is in Africa. So you can come very quickly to the conclusion that we better have policies, global policies, mainly on the agricultural front, that will make Africa become, you know, feed the world, so to speak. Are we there? No, I think we are reacting sporadically, or we are reacting in short-term to short-term situations. The last time there were food riots in Africa was in 2008, if I recall. And then food security and the development of the agricultural sector in Africa became a priority, but frankly a short-lived priority on the global agenda. There are still meetings, but how much concrete investments have been made in Africa in the agricultural sector? I'm afraid that this is really not up to the challenge. You know, the World Bank, an institution that we both know, Kemal, has had almost no agricultural action for 40 years, 50 years. And then in 2008, you know, the annual report, our flagship report, was on agriculture. But if you look concretely at how many instruments were you know, invested in Africa and in agriculture, I think it remains very limited if we look at the challenges. Now, to my second point is really linking this issue of food security and the imperative of making Africa part of the solution to some of the issues we've discussed also, you know, for example, the last session yesterday. Talked about the future, what is it, the future of the Middle East. We should talk about the future of Africa also. I think it's an important part. But we looked at it from a security point of view. And if we look at the current challenges on the security front, I think Youssef alerted us to the fact that the solutions have to be multidimensional. You cannot solve these issues just from a security point of view, or from a political point of view, or even from a religious point of view. And we've addressed how the need to deconstruct some of the narrative there, and it's feasible. But there is a fourth leg, so to speak, that we haven't, that was missing, at least to a large extent yesterday, which is the economic development issue. You know, how much of the crisis in Syria, in Libya, and what we're witnessing today with the exodus to Europe is really related to political issues or democratization issues, and how much is related to basic lack of economic opportunity for the youth. The Arab Spring, after all, started because of that. Okay? Now, imagine if we lack to address the rural development challenge, the agricultural development challenge in Africa, then we are strengthening the rural exodus, which is already happening. Thank God today most African countries still have 60 to 70% of their population rural, but they're moving to the cities with lack of economic opportunity in the cities. And that rural exodus to the cities translate into exodus through the Mediterranean, let's face it. Okay? So, you know, if we do not contribute to rural development, agricultural development, Africa, I think the security challenge that we discussed yesterday is simply going to be exacerbated. And I will finish just by a small point, maybe technical, but it's not really technical. How do we address the agricultural development challenge of Africa? There are two extremes. One is, and we see some thought along that way, some desire to address it this way is, well, 60% still arable land not used. Let's move to intensive, mechanized, large-scale agriculture. It's probably going to be part of the solution. Let's bring technology to solve the problem. But I would suggest, I would submit that this will only increase the rural and the security issues, because this type of agriculture accelerates the rural exodus. The other solution, and probably the right way, is the mix of this, is to address the small farmer challenge. You know, more precision or small-scale farming and agriculture. And I know many African countries are addressing that challenge. Ethiopia is one of them, giving the example. So I'll stop at that, Kemal, and give the
Thank
floor.
you very much, Mostafa. And I think the last point, that choice, although you said both are needed, but is a real question. And then there's also the whole issue of supporting the hungry. And I think it's important to support them with production rather than just feeding per se. I mean, of course, if people are hungry, they have to be fed. But there is also the emphasis on actually producing the food as opposed to just feeding them, which is another issue I want to come to later on in the discussion. Minister Oqubay, your turn, and particularly also I'm sure you will focus on the need to support the smallholders' production in agriculture.
Thank you. I fully agree with Mostafa when he said about smallholder farming, the focus on it. And the key reason is we need to boost agricultural outputs, not just to increase outputs, but also to make sure that the livelihood of farmers is improved. If we have to do that, we have to focus on changing and transforming the livelihood of the small farmers. Having said this, I would like to say, to relate it with the economic transformation of Africa. Africa has about 1.1 billion population, and close to half live in rural areas. So Africa in this context could be when also the issue of food security is linked to the broader security issues. It's absolutely important that we see that whether Africa could be part of the problem or part of the solution. I am a believer that Africa could be part of solution, and for me the best example is this could be represented by Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a country with 94 million population, and it makes it the second most populous country in Africa. But Ethiopia has passed through wars and famine in the 80s. But since 1991, things have changed. And at that time, we had only 40 million population, and now we have 94. We are able to feed ourselves. And also the peace and security issues has been improved. And the key intervention that has been made was, first is we have primarily focused in improving the economy, focusing solely on rapid economic growth. So currently it's considered one of the fastest growing economy, while we don't have much petroleum or resources. For the last 12 years, GDP has been growing at 11%, primarily driven by agriculture and partly by manufacturing. Recently, manufacturing is growing fast, and since 2010, manufacturing sector is growing by 20% every year. But the key issue is that what matters is not only fast economic growth. Without fast economic growth, for sure, there is no much cake to eat. But the key inseparable element is how do you make it inclusive. Without a shared growth, we cannot have peace. We cannot think of governance as well. So in this respect, our policy has been entrenched in strengthening inclusiveness. And one of the key evidences for this has been we have been able to reduce people living under poverty line from 54% in 1991 to 22% last year. And life expectancy is also a very good measure because it talks about food security, about health and education. And in 1990, the average life expectancy in Ethiopia was 45 years, and at Africa level it was 50. Now in Ethiopia in 2014, it's 64, and average Africa's is 57. So in less than 25 years, the life expectancy has increased by 19 years, the highest in the world. So the key lesson is we need to focus on economic growth, economic dynamism, but also on making it inclusiveness, ensuring inclusiveness. One additional element to highlight is we cannot separate this from improving the geopolitics as well as climate issue. And Ethiopia has been a major player in improving the geopolitical situation in the region. We provide the largest peacekeeping force in Africa and number 4 globally. And this contributes towards peace, because without peace and security, we cannot think of economic growth. In addition to this, though we are a poor country, we also we are focusing on climatic issue as well, which is going to be a major issue in December in Paris, in the climate summit. And in this respect, we use 99% of our energy from renewable energy, mainly hydropower and wind energy. And in addition to this, we have also extensive afforestation programs that help to protect the environment. So this is an indication that a poor country has the same responsibility as an advanced country to protect the climate, because for a better world, we need to jointly work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll come back to these issues. Kostas, your turn as an opening, and then we'll continue.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank the organizers for allowing me to participate in this absolutely exciting policy conference. Allow me, Kemal, to bring the issue back to a little bit on water, because this is part of the main topic of this, and to remind everyone that in addition to the SDG 2 on hunger, there is also SDG 6 that says ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. The water has been back in big time in the global governance of food security and nutrition. There was a big paper presented and endorsed by the members of the Committee on World Food Security in October on water and food security. And I encourage people to look at it, because it contains quite a bit of information on the nitty-gritty of water and how it affects food security. Now, the linkages between water and food security, of course, are not only through agriculture and irrigation, although irrigation constitutes about 70% of withdrawals of renewable water in the world overall. 90% for the developing countries and as low as 43% for the developed countries. So it's a primary user of water. However, the safe drinking water is a big issue for food security, because today close to 800 million people lack access to safe water. So even if you have the food, drinking unsafe water will make you sick. It's compromising nutrition and food security. The other one, of course, is the link to agriculture and especially the role of irrigation. There is the water for ecosystems, which at the end of the day preserve the resources which we use to do agriculture, and of course is important for energy industry and the manufacturing, which constitute sources of employment and at the end of the day food security. Now, what is the issue of water today and its links to food security? First of all, at global level, we don't see at this very moment, if you look at the global situation, a water problem. And let me make this a little more explicit. As I said, agriculture is the major user of water, so you cannot talk about water availability or water wars that people were talking about a few years ago without talking about irrigation. As I said before, water for irrigation is a major extraction from the renewable water, and there is water stresses at the regional level. We all know, for example, in Near East and North Africa, the problem of water is already acute. With extraction of water, more than 40% of the available renewable water resources, which by hydrologists is considered a critical standpoint. So you have to go at the regional level to see some of the water stresses. I'll talk about Africa in 1 minute. Now, in perspective, and based on our multidisciplinary based projections to 2050, I'll come back to your point that 2050 is not very, very long. It's still a human timescale rather than a geological timescale. We expect, as very correct was pointed out, to have to increase about 60% food production for the world. That is based on projections on population growth, the fact that the world will be richer and it will consume more calories, but also the fact that as countries get richer, they consume different types of food. More processed foods, more livestock-based foods, more protein-based food, prepared foods, which they require more water in order to be produced than when they were, let's say, in the rural areas or in farming. So you can see that some of the stresses on the water will come from competition between agricultural water and water for other uses, including, of course, municipality water. There is no, in our view, and based on our projections, which actually we used also for the World Bank World Development Report 2008-9, by 2050 then, the food that we're going to produce is going to be mostly based on yield increases, on productivity, with very little need to add land resources. To give you a number, we use today about 1.6 billion hectares of land of medium or high potential for agriculture, and we're going to use about another 80 million, which is not a big amount of land. But I will agree with the first speaker that this land, about 85%, is based on the developing countries of Africa and Latin America. So the fact that Africa is a potential breadbasket, I think with proper investment, etc., I fully agree. What about water? Now, this land, being of high or middle-level potential, about 300,000 acres are of low potential, and we know exactly how it's happening, but it's happening. This land it has a potential because either is irrigated or there is, of course, rain. So in a sense, the question is, in terms of water pressure, how much more irrigation we will need, right? There are some monkey wrenches in this scenario, which I will mention very quickly. We're going to expand irrigated areas by about 6.6%. It's not a very big number. With today's irrigated potential land, that is the land that is potential for irrigation, we will reach about 60% by then. So the potential to irrigate more after 2050 without major changes in technology, etc., will start to be compromised, but it's not going to be grave in our view. So The question then is, when we look at 2050, is the increasing competition for water resources. Climate change, which is very difficult to include accurately into the projections that we make. Others have done scenarios ranging from the Armageddon to not particularly serious, especially by 2050, where the full effects of climate change will come in. There is an uncertainty about this, which we cannot fully take into consideration. So unless climate change really throws a monkey wrench, which will compromise a lot our ability, the rainfall, the aquifers, and everything else that has to do with water, the question will be a stress in the competition between water for agriculture and for other uses. The question then is at the country level, because that's where the food security issue is. Globally, we know we have 790 million people undernourished. We hope to eliminate undernutrition by 2030. I'm not sure how feasible that is. It depends on what we're going to do. But at the end of the day, to find the ways to tackle malnutrition and hunger, we have to go at the country level. And that's where the resolution of this conflict for water use will be materializing at the end of the day. That is, who is going to get access to the more limited quantities of water at the country level? It will be small farmers, coming back to the original question, in which we will have issues of food security. It will be manufacturing, it will be municipalities, et cetera, et cetera. And to me, that's, so the question I want to put on the table, and then we can continue the discussion, is how this, let's say, in areas that are stressed for water, as I said before, it would be Near East and North Africa, some parts of Southern Africa, and Central Europe, Central Asia, sorry. Central Asia, they will feel more the stress. And how this will be resolved will determine food security outcomes.
Thank you very much, Kostas. And I think you ended rightly stressing that each country, in a way, has to have a strategy because it has the policy levers. But let me take a step back and kind of ask you a little bit what you think about one debate which is emerging among economists around the SDGs and so on, and which has to do a lot with the fragmentation of the international development system, the multiple actors. And since I was at the UN very happily, and I think the UN is crucial to all of this, but it has the weakness that each agency is pushing and advocating its own agenda, and its own funding, because it's all competing for the same funding. And there's an answer that some people give, which I will caricature now, but I don't believe in it myself at all, but just to give you an opportunity to react. I mean, there is the following very simple calculus one can make, okay? There are 1 billion, roughly, of very poor people. You said 780 or 60 hungry people. If you like. But let's say 1 billion, for the sake of the argument. The poverty line, as you know, is 1.25. Let's say that to each of these people, you give $1. That's $1 a day. That's $1 billion. Do that every day of the year, you get $365 billion. Okay? That is roughly 0.2% of world GDP. So, in a very simplistic world, if you could mobilize 0.2% of GDP and just distribute it to people, that would be the end of poverty. And there are serious arguments that at least doing some of that is better than trying to support indirectly all kinds of other channels. Instead of that, give the purchasing power to the person, to the people, to the peasant, to the poor person in the city, and let that person then spend it the way they want. And if they need to buy food, they will create demand for food, and this food will then be produced because there is demand. So it's like shortcutting a whole lot of issues, okay? But of course, the disadvantage is that you basically create a permanent, how should I say, welfare system, I think. It's highly simplistic, and I believe it's not at all an answer to our problems. Nonetheless, given the waste that often exists in the aid system and all that, what is the balance for the international community between cash support, if you like, versus supporting productive projects in irrigation, in small-scale agricultural production systems, mechanization, and issues like that, and including, I think, what I said, and I don't know too much about it, but maybe some of you do. The new technology can do a lot for smallholders if it's deployed right. So that's one question that I have in my mind. The other question, and you take it whichever way you want, is the link to energy. In other words, with, how those energy policies, water policies, and agricultural policies kind of interact. But anyway, these are just 2 points that I want to raise. You're quite, obviously quite free to raise other points. Mostafa, can I turn to you? How do you answer the simplistic ideology? Or maybe...
Well, if it relates to the small farmer, if they use that $1 to buy fertilizer, I'll be happy. No? No, but I think it's... I don't think it's simplistic, but I think the solution is always a complex mix of both. $1 a day. I mean, we have live experiments of that, which you mentioned. It's welfare states, and some of them, experienced an Arab Spring. They didn't stop. So giving just income to people who cannot turn it into dignity, into making sense of their life, I don't think resolves the other problem, which is security and long-term security and welfare. So, but what you said is not if this or this. I mean, many institutions, again, referring to the World Bank, that we know have mixed both instruments. They don't call it subsidies, they call it output-based aid at one point. They must have changed that, but it's exactly that. And there is probably a mixture of both, increasing purchasing power, but is it going to go to consumption or to buying the technology that will increase productivity? That's a key question. But, going back to the fragmentation, I think this happens in many instances at the global scale, the global development community. It also happens at the country level. You have to deal with sectoral policies and ministries, and to which extent they coordinate and create synergies, again, in terms of that governance. Ethiopia is an example, is giving the example on how you coordinate at a higher level. But we're seeing it even in terms of the SDGs. We were having this discussion in the background. Some of them are addressed, even though all of them are viable and are defendable, but some of them are addressed with policies and instruments that contradict each other precisely because at the country level, it's 2 different ministries handling 2 different SDGs. What is lost is a holistic approach. Everything is related. So, that's a bit of my wisdom in this. And again, it also happens within companies. Constantly management is trying to fight silos, departments not talking to each other. So it is a
part of
general,
organizational life.
The second question, I forget.
So the energy, the lowering of energy and of oil prices. How does it link to the whole dynamic?
I think it's again the same issue. Everything is related. I don't think you can have, at a country level, for example, an energy policy, an agricultural policy, a water policy that are not interrelated. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It unfortunately does happen. But people talk of the food water and energy nexus for a good reason. There is strong interaction, and frankly, you cannot do anything viable if you don't consider the interactions. The tools are there to do that from a methodological point of view, even from a scientific point of view, systemic analysis tools, etc. But are they reflected in the way we address the problems, in the way we organize ourselves, again, to address the problem? I'm not sure.
Any comments?
Yeah. In terms of fragmentation, I don't think it will be a major problem because it has been, there has always been fragmentation in terms of among international organizations, even within national seats. Ministries have different interests and different agendas. So it will be unrealistic to expect a more homogeneous approach to this. But the key issue would be we have a simple version that is usually referred. Do you want to give a person a fish if he is hungry, or do you want to train him fishing if he wants to support himself? So in this case, the one which Kemal has been mentioning is basically a donor-driven approach. It sees the billions of people, helpless people that are to be fed by somebody else. So from the very thinking, it's not about social transformation, it's not about economic transformation. So from my point of view, the international organizations and the international system should be supportive to African countries, to developing countries, as was the case with Europe. In post-World War II, we know that Marshall Plan has played an important role in the recovery of Europe, and Europe is now one of the dynamic places or advanced economies. So if the international community could come up with an approach that the best approach to help Africa or Asia or some developing countries would be to provide them inputs that can trigger more economic dynamism that could really have a good, a positive impact. But the second option is not going to help much. And I would like to bring to this floor that 2 years back, as we all know, France has come up with the growth initiative, in particular on the France-Africa relationship. In its terms of practicality, it hasn't moved much, but I believe that is a correct approach, looking at Africa as an economic partner rather than based on the donor relationship is a very positive approach. So for me, the key point is, number one, the international community should be restrained from giving any prescription to developing countries. From Ethiopian experience, we know that it has always been a mixed effect. Sometimes international organizations trying to put to assert their policy prescriptions, and which has played negative role in Africa, in many African countries. And one of the best reasons why Ethiopia has been able to achieve economic dynamism in the last 2 decades is it has followed its own unique development path, and in many instances it has rejected recommendations and prescriptions from international organizations. We invested in improving the capacity of power generation, for instance, when we're recommended not to expand. We only had one university, and some international organizations told us, you don't need more universities. But we spent more money on universities. We have more than 40 universities with 500,000 students, and that is going to be rewarding for us when we are moving towards an economic stage where growth, where manufacturing will play a critical role. So the key issue is international organizations and international systems should not assert or should not put on policy prescriptions. Secondly, international companies and international organizations could play a positive role if they focus on triggering more economic dynamism. And this is helpful because migration could be stopped if there is economic dynamism in Africa and some some underdeveloped countries. And in the same token, security can improve.
Thank you very much. Any quick comment, then we can go another. Yeah.
The fragmentation of actually of the food security governance in the world has increased after the food price crisis of 2008-2009, because the G20, the G8, they started getting into the food security thing. To me, this is a welcome. This is actually a welcome event. It's not bad for this at this level to take account of what's happening in food security and in agriculture. So it's a welcome thing. Now, there is no such thing as a coordinating hand on this, right? And neither could it be. The latest effort to coordinate to at least not coordinate because it doesn't have the power, but at least to provide a forum for coordination is the Committee on World Food Security, which was revamped in 2008 into something a lot more meaningful than it used to be. To what extent the global fragmentation of food security governance reflects the country-level fragmentation, which is actually a major impediment to making progress on food security and nutrition, that I don't know. I haven't studied the matter, and I suppose it has to do something. At least they're based on the same principle. Everybody has its own objectives and individual and institutional mandates. And so, but I cannot look at the reflection in a structured way. But I would want to come to the point that you mentioned on the $1 a day. First, the World Bank, I think, have revised this to 1.9, but right before the MDG forum, or 1.4, something like this.
So it was 1.25, and now for the next period, I think it will be 1.4.
Right. So it's a bit high.
But it's not all food, of course.
No, it's not food at all. This has to do with the notion of the safety net, or the social protection programs. Now, I'm glad that Ethiopia is in the room. They have one of the most successful productive safety nets in the world, in the developing countries at least, parallel only to the ones in Brazil and some of the Latin American countries, Mexico, etc. It combines the two things that you, Kemal, mentioned. It combines a minimum threshold of income for poor households. Sometimes this income is linked to taking the kids to school or taking the kids to the local health center. It's tied to conditions, conditional, and some of it is unconditional. What the Ethiopians have done is they didn't just give them the difference between what they earn and the dollar, conceptually the PPP dollar a day, but they gave them enough that they could use this as a startup capital, if you wish, to buy more inputs for the farm, to do a little irrigation investment there. It has been very successful, but it takes massive investment. I think the first tranche in Ethiopia was about $5 billion worth of investment. All worth it, because it makes a big difference to the thing. Politically, a solution by which you give people the difference between what they earn and $1.4 a day is not very palatable. Nobody wanted to, but at the same time, we calculated right before the Financial Development Conference in Addis, we calculated a system by which you provide people in the beginning with social protection, but as they invest, they get out of the social protection and more into investment income. And you need a few billion in the beginning, and then you need very little towards the end of the scheme. You can find this on our website. So this is the nitty-gritty. Coming back to the governance, though, and allow me 1 minute, because this is also about water. The governance of world water, I think it's more successful than the governance of food security and nutrition, also because a large majority, about 60 or 70% of total workflows of water goes through borders. There are about 700 bilateral, multilateral, regional, sub-regional, and other kinds of deals for the management of water flows. And they seem to be working. There hasn't been a water war like it was trumpeted a few years ago. And some extremely successful ones whereby they manage water basins. The Mekong is one of them, and some others, which they actually promote development through the deals and the arrangements on water management and governance.
Okay, so maybe to try to not sum up, but at least attempt to give a little bit of a a synthesis, I think one can make the following points. I think the calculations relating to the difference between 1.4 or 1.25 or even $2, which is the, show that the problem of extreme poverty in a purely accounting sense in the world is humanly a huge challenge, but economically actually manageable. If one had the will to provide these safety nets. I mean, it's of the order of 0.2, 0.3, 0.4%, not less than 0.5% of world GDP. I think it's a good message because it tells the world, we're not dealing with from a situation which is completely unmanageable, okay? So then one comes to the point of how to manage it, and I think all of our panel agreed that the simplistic solution of just, paying people cash is only a very partial solution. There may be situations where that has to be done, but the real challenge is to link that to creation of productive capacity, learning of technology, good habits in terms of schooling and things of that sort, which, by the way, the successful poverty schemes that have been used in Brazil, in Mexico, in other parts of the world, in Ethiopia, show that there is a way to do this, again, without spending inordinate amounts of money. When it comes to the bigger development issue and growth issue, beyond food security and beyond just fighting hunger, of course, we enter a much bigger territory. And all of you have touched upon that, because I think particularly the minister and Mr. Terrab Mostafa coming from developing countries, none of us sees the picture just as one. I mean, poverty fighting is extremely important, but it's part of overall development. It's not that objective, and once you have achieved it, it's okay. For a charitable organization in the rich world, it may be viewed that way, because once you've taken care of the extremely poor, as a charitable organization, maybe your objective is fulfilled. But as a development leader, obviously this is not at all sufficient. But in the international debate, these two things sometimes get mixed up. And I think it was very useful to stress that you have to think of it as an overall development policy. Before I turn to the audience, anything on technology, because there are so many technology optimists around these days who have miracle solutions for this or that. And I'm not very knowledgeable on these, but in your field, as people who work particularly in do you see any technological breakthroughs that kind of change, that are revolutionary, that are disruptive?
In general terms, there has been historical incidences that people were afraid that the world will not be able to feed itself, starting from the time of Malthus. But we know that humankind comes up with creative solutions. So I believe that technology will play an important role. Looking at even existing productivity level in agriculture, the key element that brings difference in terms of productivity is the technology and input in agriculture. So we may not be able to predict what type of technology comes, but technology will play a very important role. I also would like to remark that the intervention we need in terms of food security is not contained in agriculture. It's not about avoiding hunger. It's not about feeding the population. It's beyond that. If countries have to feed the continuously increasing population, then they have to also look at how manufacturing should play an important role, like in African countries. In Ethiopia, for instance, every year the population is increasing by 2.3 million. This is twice the population of Mauritius every year, every single day. And this population increase is not only in the rural areas, but urban areas. So how do we create jobs for these young people? How do we avoid frustration of the youth? How do we create a better future is a key challenge. And we believe that African countries not only should focus on agriculture, but they should also see at light manufacturing, at labor-intensive industries to create jobs for the youth, because we are not going to send the youth from cities to the rural areas. In fact, people are coming from rural areas and living in cities, but mainly deployed in informal occupations, which is not sustainable for them to live. So this is one element. The second one is all this intervention requires long-term investment in education, in skill formation, in infrastructure. In Ethiopia, one of the key mysteries or one of the key lessons is that we have been spending up to 60% of our budget in long-term investment, in roads, in rural roads, in new railway systems now, electric-driven railway system, in hydropower. We are building the largest hydropower in Africa, 6,000 megawatt. We are building the first electrified railway system in Africa. And this has also an impact on climate issue. We are now on massive construction of industrial parks, but we are trying to build green industrial parks. So when we look at food security and agriculture, we have to link it with the development in manufacturing. We have to link it with long-term investment in skill formation and infrastructure.
Well, I think your question is fundamental, because if we think of agriculture, food security, it is clear that the technology exists. There is even a market for technology. Technology is global, but the solutions are based on innovation. How do you adapt? How do you select the right technology and adapt it to the local condition to make it relevant? Innovation is local. So even the investment in technology for agriculture, coming with a massive approach, saying here are the technologies that have worked elsewhere, let's adapt the way we do agriculture in Africa to these technologies, whether it's intensive or large scale, is going to may even lead to problems. We have an example. We have a situation where there was massive investment in one sector in Africa that frankly surprised everybody. And it was based on technology, which is the mobile revolution in Africa. But let's look closely at why it succeeded. It succeeded because it was African operators that recognized the opportunity, but adapted the technology with local innovation to what the market really needed in Africa. This is, they've recognized that you don't sell mobile services and deploy mobile services in Africa the same way you do it elsewhere. There is even a technology or an innovation that is now coming to the rest of the world that originated in Africa, which is mobile payments. Kenya was one of the first countries to do mobile payment already 15 years ago. So I think innovation is more important than technology, and that requires the type of investment that the minister mentioned: education, human capacity, and things like that. They are fundamentally important.
Anything to add?
Actually, I will fully support what Mostafa just said. Let's talk about, if we want to talk about technology and technology adoption that will increase agricultural yields, our returns to agricultural labor, if you wish, or land, we don't have to look at the space age stuff. Those exist and actually can be put to good use. Satellite imaging, warning people ahead of catastrophes, etc. This is, in Malawi itself, if the farmers adopted the exact technologies and technological solutions that exist in the experiment station, exactly under identical agroecological conditions, they could increase maize yields by 5. So the question is why they don't. The issues of education, investment, availability of water, incentives at the end of the day. Look at the fraction of the price that the farmer gets as a farmer price to the border price or to the consumer price. So it's a matter of incentives, education, and supporting investment that will make a farmer who lives under probably rain-fed conditions and is very risky, to adopt a technology that already exists for a long time. So that could be a technological breakthrough, right? The type of revolution that you're talking about, but it's a technology that's 10 years old.
No, I think all of the panelists made the similar point. There are existing technologies and very quickly developing technologies that look kind of almost miraculous. And when I interact with, Silicon Valley investors, I sometimes get this thing, what are you worried about? Let us just go there and solve the problem, in a few years. It's not quite as simple as that, because the whole institutional setup from health to education to roads to everything is part of it. And so while I think the Silicon Valley spirit is excellent because it has a lot of optimism in it and new technology and so on, the development problem is a little more holistic than just adopting one new technology and solving the problem with it. Okay, let's open to the floor, and I have quite a few. I have you first there, and then Miguel Angel Moratinos, and then we'll take 3 at a time or 4 maybe, and we do have to finish at 12:15. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll be quick. It's just 2 questions. My name is Jalal Abdul Latif from Ethiopia. It's a good news to say the world is waiting for Africa to feed the rest of the world. I hope this will not be a misplaced hope. Is Africa ready for this? Are you asking an African agriculture revolution? If you look at today's African agriculture structure, land, labor, soil, test, is below expectation. 45% malnutrition general in Africa. The soil stress of lack of water is serious. Low technology intervention. Are we putting really huge demand on Africa that will not meet itself? Second, on technology. The emergence of mobile phone and satellite. Think of mobile phone as a farmer tool, not a mobile phone. Soil data, Africa, there is no soil data. The soil has not been tested. Land has not been mapped. Land titles are not charted. There is a chaos there. But it's great, wonderful that Africa can feed the world, but before it has to feed itself. And that I'm asking you, are we guys wait for an African agricultural revolution like what happened in Asia?
Thank you. Miguel Angel?
Thank you, and congratulations to all panelists. I agree that we are discussing global governance and the future of global governance. That's the reason food security and water security are included. Before, all kind of this conference will discuss about peace and war, border dispute, hegemony, but we bring to global governance the security issues that are food security, water security, so the new concept of security. And I was very much interested to hear from you when Kemal mentioned the fragmentation of the whole system. Well, we are all obsessed about the reform of Security Council of the UN, but there is no real, let's say, launching a real debate of a UN family, UN reform that includes the development agencies, organization, and how we are going to adapt the new reality to this new world. We have approved in September the 17 SDG, extraordinary, fantastic. How we are going to implement them? With the same institution? You think the institution already exists and are capable to deliver in order that in 2013 we'll be able to say, let's go to another, I don't know how we call them, the MDG, then SDG. Maybe in 2015 we are not achieving our goal. We will call them sustainable and efficiently MDG. In order to achieve that, maybe we should start to change the agencies and the organization of development. And I hope that that is going to be part of the UN reform. and including in Security Council, just I finish, as President Obama rightly present in the Security Council for the first time, not a traditional issue of security, hard security, but Ebola. So why we don't introduce in the Security Council reform the other security elements and threats that we are confronting? So my question is how you will think, you will continue to have FIO, WFP, FIDA, all these kind of organizations that are competing each other, and that at the end there's a lack of coordination in order to achieve our goal. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Oui, une remarque et une réponse plutôt et deux questions. La réponse est à vous, monsieur. Vous avez dit, y a-t-il des innovations? Il y en a une qui n'a pas encore été évoquée, qui est pourtant essentielle, qui sont les OGM. Comme vous le savez, 90% du soja mondial est OGM, 70% du coton mondial est OGM, et on sait que les pays d'Afrique utilisent beaucoup plus facilement ces innovations que ne font les Européens, et notamment les Français. Alors, une question à vous, monsieur Terrab, et puis une question à vous, monsieur Stamoulis. Il se trouve que j'ai commencé ma vie il y a un demi-siècle en construisant des barrages en Afrique et en essayant de développer la culture attelée au Niger. Il se trouve aussi que je connais un peu le Maroc et assez bien le Sénégal, et que 50 ans après, on peut dire que les progrès dans l'agriculture traditionnelle sont très très limités. Et donc, dans vos remarques tout à l'heure, monsieur Terrab, qu'est-ce qui ferait changer dans la décennie qui vient ce qui ne s'est pas produit durant un demi-siècle? Donc ça, c'est la première question. La question à vous, monsieur Stamoulis. Vous avez, comme souvent, quand on parle d'eau, parlé d'un problème très spécifique, mais qui n'est pas le problème général, qui est le problème des zones semi-désertiques ou désertiques. Or, le problème de l'humanité, ce n'est pas le manque d'eau, c'est l'excès d'eau. Et quand on regarde les catastrophes environnementales de ces 5 dernières années, la plus grande catastrophe, c'est une inondation au Pakistan qui a couvert 40% de la surface de la France, qui a déplacé 20 millions d'habitants et qui a tué, on ne sait pas combien, mais des dizaines de millions de personnes. Non, il a tué des dizaines de milliers, merci. Pardon, il y en a un qui suit au moins. Des dizaines de milliers de personnes. Bon, 80% de l'humanité vit à 300 kilomètres de la mer et dans des zones de delta, donc des zones inondables. Et donc ma question, c'est qu'est-ce qui devrait pouvoir permettre de réguler les inondations des grands fleuves et ce faisant permettre l'accès d'une partie de la population de l'humanité à l'eau potable, mais également aux égouts. Encore une fois, on somnubile sur les questions de manque d'eau. Ce que vous avez dit est vrai, c'est-à-dire que le premier prélèvement, c'est l'irrigation, mais en général, une irrigation, je prends juste les chiffres de la France, en France, ruisselle ou s'infile 176 milliards de mètres cubes. Nous perdons 171 milliards de mètres cubes, c'est-à-dire c'est l'eau qui retourne à la mer, donc c'est de l'eau perdue, entre guillemets. Et l'irrigation, c'est seulement 3 milliards. Donc 3 milliards, c'est tout à fait négligeable. Donc encore une fois, on somnubile sur les problèmes de manque d'eau, alors que le problème de l'humanité, c'est l'excès d'eau.
Merci beaucoup. I'm going to take one more question in the back, Jonathan, and then I'm trying to, there are lots of questions, so Jonathan, I want to give the equal chance to the back rows then. Yes, l'ambassadeur là aussi. But try to be a little bit briefer, because otherwise we will completely run out of time.
I will be very brief and invite the panel, in the spirit of your question on technology, to comment on the contribution of science, including genetic modification, as contributing to yield, or whether that has to be put aside in light of global public opinion. Second, to comment on education about food security, because we have witnessed in recent times too many people equating food security with food self-sufficiency. And actually, the way to feed the world is to increase the flow of food. Everybody should contribute. Just to take Canada as an example, we produce 150% of the calories our population needs. We'd be delighted to provide that to the rest of the world if permitted. I'm not sure the global governance system facilitates the movement of food to strengthen food security. Thank you.
Jonathan, maybe in the trade negotiations, then one has to include the banning of export taxes on food. Okay, shall we do one round or should we take more questions?
I can start.
Okay, why don't we do a quick round here, and then we may have one quick round of more questions. Yeah.
Actually, I'll very briefly relate to the two questions. One that was asked is, are we expecting too much from Africa? And then the question you posed, because I think they are related. What I was trying to say on Africa will have to feed the world, I think that it is, the figures show that it is inevitable. The real question is, how is it going to happen? I see the risk of a massive intervention to allow, to have Africa move quickly to feed the world, okay? We have seen it before. Africa has massively contributed to industrial development in the rest of the world through supplying commodities. But that has it led to human development, to economic development in Africa? That's the problem. So there can either be, if we can indeed, you ask the question, why didn't it happen 50 years, during the past 50 years? We are either going to see and witness a massive intervention, but very much like the commodity intervention of the past 100 years, that is making Africa the low-cost producer of food commodities. And then, we are going to move to land grabs and things like this. Not that it is happening today, really, seriously, but we may move to that kind of non-adapted agriculture to Africa, but that will create, I would pose a huge security challenge because it does not resolve, again, the same way as the commodity, the curse of commodities, if so to speak, or the commodity curse has created in many African countries. It doesn't resolve the basic problem of economic development in Africa. So it is what type of intervention? I'm suggesting that today we have time to think of a massive intervention, but in terms of investment in agriculture that is adapted to the low farmer and very importantly to the ecology of Africa. We have to maintain Africa's biodiversity in agricultural product, not import the type of products that are not adapted to the African soil. Because we can see major disasters in terms of the replenishment of soil nutrients. So the question is, are we going to anticipate and do the right thing, or indeed do like we've done over the past 50 years and try to adapt Africa to serve the rest of the world?
If I may add a few points on what Jalal said, he raised a very important issue. And what it means is that first, we need to focus that Africa would be able to feed itself. Without feeding itself, it cannot be able to provide surplus to the remaining part of the world. Having said this, the key issue is how can it feed itself is also a major political issue and a major challenge for policymakers. And this brings us back that African countries should focus on transformation of agriculture. The key issue is they have to focus on transformation of agriculture, even be it countries that have abundant petroleum resources. In the final analysis, they have to diversify the economy. So one key issue is Africans, we have to focus on transformation of agriculture. Secondly, there is no shortcut and miracles are not going to happen in a year or two. We need a long-term perspective. Intervention in education, intervention in infrastructure, intervention in all dimensions. Without a holistic approach, it's impossible to bring long-term changes. And the third element is we need to focus on the poor. We have billionaires in Africa, but we also have a big proportion of poor people. So the issue of shared growth, the issue of inclusiveness is a very important policy issue. And this is also an important part of the solution to the broader issue of security. I'm not strictly talking about food, but including political security and also safety issues, which we are witnessing now. Having said this, it also brings us back to we need to raise some critical issues. One is countries should have their own national policies. The key intervention that brings change is not at the level of international order. It's primarily within national borders. So countries need to have a very solid national policy that will help us to achieve this. Without that, the international community or international order is not going to replace. The second aspect is, in terms of international economic order, it's not, we have to understand that it's not fully conducive to poor countries, to least developing countries. For instance, agriculture is subsidized in Europe. This has an effect on African agricultural outputs, and the international trade order doesn't support the poor. So having to make sure that there is an international economic order that will be helpful to least developing countries or conducive to Africa will be basically important. And development assistance, as we all know, advanced countries had agreed that they will contribute a specific percent of their share of GDP. I think it was about 0.7%. It's only perhaps 1 or 2 countries who are doing this, but the remaining advanced economies are not doing this, and they are in fact struggling also to cope with the post-financial crisis economic situation. So the assistance, development assistance could really help to boost agriculture in countries in Africa. Last point, it was mentioned that the problem is not about water shortage, it's also about flooding, etc. For me, the way to present it is that the problem we have to squarely put is that it's also linked to climate change. We don't get the right water at the right time, at the right place. So this requires a very concerted and international position and international coordination to make sure that every country plays an important role in climate protection, be it poor or rich.
Thank you very much. I have another 3 or 4 minutes, so I have to really, the ambassador there, but please be very short. Otherwise others, and then I will turn to you, and then I think I will close it.
Merci. Des interventions extrêmement intéressantes. Si vous permettez, je retiendrai l'intervention du ministre conseiller éthiopien sur une question précise. Nous avons vu la question de la souveraineté évoluer, c'est-à-dire la question sécuritaire, la question du commerce, la question des finances et timidement la question de la santé. Cela veut dire que maintenant, il y a des questions qui prennent une dimension régionale, un traitement régional, et il y a un effort. Ça, c'est le premier point. Or, on sait maintenant qu'il y a un lien direct entre les catastrophes naturelles, la faim et la migration. Ça veut dire que la question de la faim ne devient plus qu'une question ou des ressources ou de la sécurité alimentaire uniquement nationale, mais ces effets sont des effets internationaux. Or là, nous avons 2 expériences assez intéressantes à étudier. La première expérience européenne, de l'Union européenne, des pays qui ont décidé d'élargir un espace de souveraineté et donc de collaborer avec un développement et des politiques sectorielles, structurelles, pour améliorer le niveau de chaque pays. Première expérience. Deuxième expérience qu'on n'étudie pas suffisamment, c'est toutes les projections chinoises et l'approche chinoise, celle de la route de la soie, ou la façon dont ils travaillent maintenant. Les politiques du gagnant-gagnant, pas uniquement de l'aide au développement, mais d'aller sur les structures et les assises du développement. Donc, ma question et en même temps ma conclusion, est-ce qu'on ne devrait pas réfléchir assez rapidement, que ce soit à l'échelon africain ou à l'échelon international, à des tentatives de politique régionale sur des questions qui sont essentielles. Et merci.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, deux dernières questions. D'abord, monsieur, et puis après, vous... Oui, voilà. Le micro, s'il vous plaît. Mais vraiment mini. On est déjà, on a dépassé de 8 minutes déjà.
Je ne fais ni une question, ni un commentaire, ni une remarque, je fais une invitation. Je viens d'un pays qui est probablement la seule success story en matière de développement agricole en conditions tropicales depuis 50 ans. J'invite le plus souvent possible, je suis dans l'agriculture brésilienne depuis 30 ans, mais au ras du sol, avec les agriculteurs, j'invite dès qu'ils le veulent, les partenaires africains à venir voir pourquoi ça a marché. Il y a beaucoup d'éléments qui ont été évoqués sur le plateau. Il y a des choses à découvrir concrètement. Nous avons des difficultés au Brésil, mais il y a un secteur qui marche, qui est devenu une des composantes essentielles de la sécurité alimentaire mondiale. Venez nous voir.
Merci. Peut-être qu'on peut demander à Thierry si ça ne serait pas une idée de se réunir au Brésil un de ces jours. Et dernière rapide question.
Ma question est essentiellement pour le représentant éthiopien. Pourrait-il nous faire le point sur la situation alimentaire aujourd'hui en Éthiopie? L'Éthiopie vient de lancer un appel d'offres pour l'importation d'1 million de tonnes de blé. J'ai l'impression que la sécheresse liée à El Niño touche particulièrement l'Éthiopie. Donc ce serait intéressant d'avoir un point là-dessus. Et sur l'Éthiopie, j'ai quand même une question. C'est quand même le pays qui, me semble-t-il, a fait le choix un petit peu du land grabbing, c'est-à-dire de confier des millions d'hectares à des exploitants extérieurs. Est-ce bien raisonnable? Et sur le long terme, est-ce vraiment quelque chose que l'on puisse conseiller?
Bon, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre. À vous d'abord, puisque c'est ciblé sur l'Éthiopie, mais il faut garder vraiment très rapide parce que...
Land grabbing is not a major issue in Ethiopia. We know that 8 years ago, land grabbing became a popular word among so-called NGOs and some scholars. And in fact, at that time, it was raised that land grabbing is being conducted and the key players are the Chinese. But the actual case was, in fact, this was researched by US research group as well. The Chinese are not at all in agriculture. We find them in manufacturing sector, like from Turkey and from India, but not in agriculture. And in our case, the country is among the top 15 countries in terms of land area. It's 1.1 square kilometers. And most of the population lives in highlands, but we have huge lowland, which is not inhabited at all. So we make it available for commercial farms. And we still attract investors, and the land we have allocated for this is only 3.5 million hectares of land. Only 10% has been used. So that has been politically, deliberately instigated. A second one, this year we have faced, as I was mentioning, the problem with rain and water is that the rain and water is coming at not at the right time and the right place. So last year we had problems of water. There was no sufficient water because it's essentially rain-fed agriculture. One of the key transformation agendas is how do we expand irrigation to cover most of agricultural land. And because of this, we have many farmers affected, but the key element is 25 years back, or in the 80s, when there was hunger, the country had to look at donors. Now the system we have is, we have a strategic reserve, and we hold some agricultural crops as a reserve, and when needed, we also buy and import. So this year we allocated, the government allocated $500 million for supporting the farmers affected because of bad rain. And this is going to happen periodically, and the best way is always to have a solid strategic reserve, and also the economy has to diversify from agriculture also to manufacturing. That's why I'm saying African countries should not only focus on agriculture, they have also to be focus on developing manufacturing sector, particularly that can help value addition to agricultural products.
Thank you very much. Very quickly said and well said. Kostas, a last minute
yes.
comment? Not more than...
No, 1 minute. The African agricultural revolution. There is very good reasons why the Asian experiment cannot be repeated. Also because the very variegated agroecological zones in Africa, which prevent a massive adoption of one technology like it happened in Asia. So that's one point. The political issue of who will implement the SDGs that Mr. Moratinos asked, the countries that signed them, they should be accountable for meeting them, and I think the rest of the system should build an accountability framework on why they have not been met. In my view, it's not the international organizations that will implement the Sustainable Development Goals. The question on the UN reform, let me say, the Stiglitz Commission, does anybody remember the Stiglitz Commission? The Stiglitz Commission of the UN proposed a security type body, a Security Council type body to address poverty and development. Of course, nobody would have ever accepted it politically to be subjected to the same rules as the ones of the Security Council. And the final, the GMOs, we as an organization have said that GMOs is one of the gamut of solutions that could be applied when possible. So nothing has been excluded and should not be excluded. Science-based, etc., but there is absolutely no exclusion of,
thank you
of
very
any
much.
technology.
Thank you, Costa. Many good points. Last word to Mostafa Terrab.
Very quickly, Mr. Carfontan, you're right. Brazil can help and has many solutions. And we're looking at that, by the way, as you know. Right before this conference in Marrakesh, we ran the Atlantic dialogues, which are really centered on a South American, African type of dialogues. And there were like, I think, 20 or 25 participants from Brazil, and we looked at that. But those Atlantic dialogues also go beyond, because I think there are other countries. India, in terms of some of its green revolution, can also help in terms of ideas. So the conclusion is, let's look at also Brazil, not just in terms of agriculture, but I heard Bolsa Familia also.
Yes, Bolsa Familia, also. But of course, Brazil has some problems right now also. Anyway, look, thank you very much, first of all, to the panel, and it was really very, very interesting for me also. I learned a lot. Thanks for the attendance, the excellent attendance, and I apologize on behalf of all of us for not having space for all the questions, but maybe some of them will come back tomorrow during the refugee crisis in Europe, because things are linked, as we know, and I wonder what's going to happen to the European budgets when they try to provide for the refugees inside Europe, help development in Africa, and be pushed to increase their defense budgets. But that's a macroeconomic question. Okay, all the best, and thank you very much again.